Guys, I'm Nina,
I'm Ethan.
and we are Bloody Essentials. We're really excited. We are not doing a movie this week. We actually have a very special guest that we are bringing on. This is John Aviña with Aviña Comics. Hi, John.
Hi, guys.
How you
It's
doing
so
today?
good to have you here.
Good.
Good.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited. You're our very first guest. This is one of the big reasons why we started the podcast was to bring on horror creators and, just talk about your art.
Yeah, no, I've loved I remember the first time I saw Evil Dead, I was like 8 years old because my uncle was watching me and my cousins, and he was
Yeah,
like, "Your parents aren't around, so let me show you something cool." And
that's
since then, I
amazing.
was terrified, but in on the genre the whole way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's what started your love for horror is your uncle introducing you to Evil Dead, huh?
Yeah, that got me into it, and then watching the original It movie, like the TV movie.
Yeah,
Yeah, because I would
that's
watch it behind
amazing.
my fingers the whole time, and then
Aw.
yeah, I was like, "I need to make something like, I want more of this."
Yeah, like, even though it was terrifying, you were just like, "I want more."
Yeah, because like, you could tell the kids were having fun with it too. So I was just like, "There's
Definitely.
something to that." So I think I've been chasing that high ever since.
That's
Absolutely.
really cool. Yeah, that adrenaline rush, there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
I did wanna ask you, when you were a kid, were you a comic book reader, like, when you were younger, or did was that something that developed?
That kinda developed. So, like, I would get, the Simpsons comics when I was a kid, and
Yeah,
I would read those because I loved the show, but I wasn't, like, collecting. I didn't really know Batman outside of, like, the cartoons and stuff.
sure.
And then as I got older, my friends were, like, really into comics, so, like, "You gotta read these." So I read them, and I was like, "Oh, these aren't, like, kid comics and stuff." There's an
Yeah.
art here that I wasn't aware of, and then I just kinda jumped into it, and I think that was, like, my sophomore year of high school, so it's been about, like 17 years. Yeah.
Wow, that's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Now I was reading on your website, some odd jobs you used to have because obviously you didn't just magically start creating comics, right? We all came from somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, you were a mortuary assistant, is that right? At one
I
point?
still am, so that's my, day job. So Monday through Friday from, like, 5 AM till 3 PM,
Wow.
I'm embalming. I'm working at a funeral home. That's why I admired your skeleton because the place I work for sends bodies for medical science to research
Yeah.
facilities. So we make skeletons.
Wow. That's so
Yeah.
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah. So it's always fun because when people are like, "Oh, like, but wouldn't that scare you?" I was like, "No, my job scares me because I'm the first one there." So it's just like
Yeah.
headphones on, turn off the coffee pot, and like turn on all the lights, like kind of run through. You know, when you're a kid and you turn off the light and you jump into bed. I'm the opposite, like run and turn on the lights through each part of the building, and then I sit in
Oof,
my
yeah.
chair. I'm like, okay, everything's illuminated. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, I was curious about that because that was a profession I considered for a while, and I'm just like, "Do you still do that? Because that's kinda cool."
It
That's
is
very cool.
awesome. Yeah, and we do, like, not tours for, like, everybody, but, like, if people are interested in going to the mortuary field, they do, like, tours and stuff, and it's really cool, like, to bring people in because 'cause you'll get, like, these big jack guys that are like, "Well, I'll drive a truck anywhere and do like, I could do the heavy lifting," and I was like, "Do you know what we do here?" They're like, "Yeah, I'm not scared of it," and then they pass the
And then they
threshold
see
with,
the
like
body.
the moment they see the feet, they're just like, "You know what?
Really?
I gotta go make a call." I was like, "Okay."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's yeah, that's so interesting. I think it's a very intriguing work, but, it's not for the faint of heart.
It's not.
Definitely
Yeah, you
not.
get some weird cases, and then you get stuff that you're just like I remember we had one, and there was just, like, these, like, bulbs growing on, like, this person's body from, like, here down, and it looked painful. It looked like blisters all over. So we were doing the research, like, because that's what we have to do before we send it to a school, and then I started getting interested in, like, the medical aspect of it,
Mhm.
but, like, my notebooks, because like, I write, so I always have something on me. I, like, pull it out, I'm like, "Note to self," like, "Look this up, where can we fit it in?" And then question mark, and then, like, little by little things trickle into the stories, the comics, and all that stuff.
Wow, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Ethan, do you have any questions
I
for
guess
us?
he kind of answered my question already. I was going to say, where did you get the inspiration for your comics? But
So, a lot
That's
of it
awesome.
that kind of answered my question.
some of it comes from, like, that, and then, mom was a mariachi singer when I was growing up.
Oh,
So
Okay.
wow.
she would drag me and my sister to, like, these bars and stuff where she would perform, but they always had, like, these Mexican art pieces and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, like, these are, like, super cool," and then when it came time to start planning, like, my first book, I was like, I kinda knew what I wanted it to look like because of what I saw, and then just started
Yeah.
incorporating, like, everything into it.
So that kinda leads me to my next question. When you started creating these stories, a lot of your stories, or at least most of them I've seen, they have some kind of Latina element to that. Was that really important to showcase that, from the beginning?
Yeah, because I wanted to do stories that were, like, authentic to me. So,
Mhm.
because I am
Makes
Mexican,
sense.
I just wanted to pull that into it because I knew that would not only set me apart from, like, some of the other, like, independent creators, but it would just make it truthful. I wouldn't have to, like, research a bunch of stuff. It would just be, like, things that I knew I can just pepper in here and there, and then it would just read more authentic as, like, the reader would pick it up. I wouldn't have to, like, over explain stuff to you as if I was new to it to justify it. It
Right.
would just be the truth of me.
That's really cool. I
Gotcha.
love that so much.
Yeah.
So how did Avina Comics like start? Like how old were you when you started it? Like when did you realize that you could potentially do this as like a profession?
It was during the, like, early days of the pandemic, like 2020. So I was a wedding photographer full time. Like, that's all I did. And then the wedding started to stop. And my mom owns a
Right.
funeral home. So she was like,
Okay.
"Come jump on board with me. Like, I need help. I don't know what this COVID thing is, but we're getting busy." So I
Wow.
started doing that, and that kind of took over because weddings were like just no, you couldn't hold events. So they
Right.
didn't need a photographer or anything. So I started doing that, but I wasn't getting that kind of creative juice out of me the way I would when I was taking pictures or shooting video. And then there's a writer I really like named Scott Snyder. He did like American Vampire. He was on
Mhm.
Batman for like 10 years. And I
Wow.
loved him. And he started
Yeah.
teaching classes on how to create comic books.
Okay.
So, from, like, the first class that I took with him, I was just like, "Well, I think I could do this because 'cause I'm, like, crazy." So, I just started writing I had, like, a film background because I went to school and, like, for screenwriting and stuff. So, I just
Mhm.
transferred some older film scripts into comics, and then I got lucky and I found, like, my artists online through Instagram, and we clicked
Wow.
right away. Like, they liked what I had to say. I love their art. And then we were
Yeah.
able to just like start making it. And then I remember by the time we were like halfway through my first book, I just kind of looked over at my wife and I was like, I think I'm gonna like do this. Like, I'm gonna not just make one book, but I have like three other stories I really want to tell. And I'm gonna go for it. And she was super supportive. We ended up having my son during like the mess of all that too. So like all the stress of everything kind of compiled. But luckily now that like we're 3 years past all that stuff, I've found my footing and now I get to go do conventions and meet people and like talk about comics, which is all I've wanted to do.
Aw, that's so
Yeah.
fun. I love that. Like, COVID has, really changed a lot of people's, career paths almost, like, one door closed, another one open, and it's very
Right.
fascinating how people dealt with that.
Yeah, especially like for the funeral stuff, like doing wakes, we had to do drive-by wakes. So we would
Oh,
actually
yeah.
put the caskets by the door and people would like come by to do that. And like you had to think on your feet, and that's
Mm,
something you kinda have to get good at, like, in film especially, and stuff, like, if
mhm.
there's a problem, you gotta figure it out in order to move on for your day, and COVID, like, really tested people on how quickly you could adapt.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, how was that, like, emotionally? Like, I feel like the family would be very emotional if they can't have a traditional funeral because of the COVID stuff.
Those are hard. So, like, we would have family and we would warn everybody, like, "Hey, like, mask up. We don't know what this thing is yet because it was, like, super early. We're like,
Right.
just be careful." And, Mexicans, there's always, like, 30 of us that show up, like, early for the, like, funerals, like, that's just how we are. And then, like, talking to them, trying to get them to, like, "Hey, like, we gotta slow this down." It
Mhm.
got to a point where it was just, like, heavy, and then every wake was, like, me arguing with, like, extended family. And I have a story called Americana, and in that one, all of, like, that angst that I had about it, I put it into that book. So it was kinda cathartic to get it out of me, but now that I'm, like, in production for issue 2, it's
Yeah.
hard to, like, recapture that feeling because so much time has gone by that it's almost like I'm digging back through my old notebooks of, like, what was I feeling during these things, and then that's helping me rewrite.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out.
Absolutely. Do you have any
Um,
conventions
yeah.
that you're coming to anytime
Yeah.
soon where people can come and see your work?
Yeah, I have Northwest Indiana Comic Con in, like, a week. I'm gonna be at
Ooh.
Days of the Dead in March. I got a table for C2E2, so that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's a big
Yeah.
one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been, like, my dream is, like, because 'cause I've gone to C2E2 since, like, they started. I love that show. So, I was
Yeah.
like, one day, like, it'd be cool to, like, have a booth set up, and then I got the notice this year that I got in. So, I was like, "Okay,
Aw,
cool." Yeah, I think they
that's
finally were
so
like,
cool.
yeah, I had enough books out that they could look through that they were like, "Okay."
You're legit, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't feel that way because so much of this is, like, if I turn the corner, it's, like, my kid's play area on this side. So it's, like, my
Right.
office and then my son's whole section. So I'm just like, it still feels so small, but, like, people are responding to it now and stuff, so it's been great.
Definitely, and I think, the Latina representation, it's not something you see very often in the horror community, and I think that is really important to your work, so I think that, that kind of sets you apart from other creators.
Yeah, and especially, like, for Latin people, so many early bedtime stories that we're told are just monster stories. Like, there's the
Yeah.
Cucuy, the Llorona, all these monsters that my son now, my favorite thing is if something scary happens, he's like, "Cucuy," and then he runs. 'Cause I'm like, okay, like, I was able to pass that on, like, that kind of general fear of, like, these monsters, and it's great to see it, and then I'm like, "Okay, now I can show him horror movies because we showed him, the first Scream, me and my wife were watching it, and then he woke up from his nap, and I was like,
Mhm.
"I gotta see it all the way through." So, like, we watched it, and he wasn't scared, so I was like, "Maybe I can get him in." Even at Days of the Dead last year, he was super into, like, the people dressed like Terrifier walking around. I was like, "Okay,
Aw.
cool." I was like, "He's a little me."
Have you shown him Terrifier yet?
No, 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 yeah.
Okay, I
My
was like,
wife
"That's really extreme."
yeah, my wife's, she's terrified of scary movies. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's always baby steps. I'm like, "We can watch, like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then
Right.
we can watch,
Right.
like, Terrifier." So that way it's like, you already kinda got a little scared, but now we can watch, like, this weird scary movie that I'm gonna
Yeah.
like more, and we're gonna see how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Definitely dip
watch
your toes
Wall-E.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
Watch a Disney movie after.
Always. It's like, it doesn't matter if we're done watching a movie at 11. She was like, "So, like, Fox and the Hound?" I'm like, "Yeah, we'll watch Fox and the Hound."
Would you do that? That's worse.
Yeah.
That is scary.
Yeah.
That is real terror. Oh my god. I have not watched that movie, I think, since I was, like, 8. I'm like, "No,
No.
there's too many childhood traumas from that."
How
Yeah.
old is your child?
He's 3.
3?
Aw.
It's a
Yeah.
good age to start. My son will be
Yeah.
15 tomorrow, and I've got him all horrified. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, he loves it. And he actually used to, when something would scare him when he was little, he would look at me and go, "Daddy, kukui?" I'm like, "Yes, kukui, son." So
Nice. Yeah.
That's
It's
amazing.
because I remember my uncle sitting me down because mom has 5 brothers, so it was always like a sea of men trying to scare us, and, like, my uncles would be like, "Alright, you guys have been bad," they'll turn the lights down, and they're like, "Have you heard of, like, the little boy snatcher?" I'm like, "No, what is he?" And they're like, "He throws boys in a backpack and, like, runs away with them." I was like, "Oh, that's terrifying," and then one of them would be outside tapping on the window, so we'd all scream and, like, run around. We were, like,
That's
genuinely, like, afraid, but for them, it was just, like, their time to shine, so now I'm waiting for, like, my kid and my nephews to get a little bit older, and I'm like, "Game on." Like
yes,
that's amazing.
yeah.
that's parenting done right.
Yes.
For sure. I wanted to ask you, what does your creative process look like? I know you said you draw a lot of inspiration from working as a mortician, but like, how do you start a new story?
So usually I'll start with like a scene. My newer story, Loteria, that came out. There was
Mhm.
I wanted to recreate the scene like in Scream where the phone call comes in, and I
Yeah.
wanted to play off of that. So I had that scene in mind, and I was like, well, how would I do that version of it? And
Mhm.
I started like laying down the groundwork, and then I walked away from it to let it like kind of marinate. And then if
Mhm.
it pulls me back to the chair to to start writing it, I know I have an idea that can go all the way through. Whereas if it's
Mhm.
just like one scene, I was like, that's just a cool scene that I can like bench and put it in something later on. But if I can't stop playing through it, then I know like it's got to come out. I got to work through it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's great.
Awesome.
When I was reading Loteria, oh my God, that your killers are fantastic. Like they're so well
Absolutely.
written.
Thank
And
you.
I love that trope of they're calling from inside the house. That's one of my favorite things ever.
Yes.
That was something that always scared me, like, in the
Yeah,
Scream movies and stuff, especially. I was like, if they're already inside, you can't go anywhere. Like, you
exactly.
lock the doors and you just trapped yourself. So I was
Yeah.
like, that's what I wanted. Like, the place where you're more comfortable is where I want it to be the most dangerous. And
Yeah.
then looked at it as like a Mexican bingo game. So it's like they call out the character and you put your thing on there. So I was like, how cool is it if it's like the person calling out the name and it's like your name? Well, you're the target. So I was kind of like playing with that idea too while I was writing it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I noticed that the cover art, the cards, they look like tarot cards, but they're not your traditional tarot cards. They're different. So that's basically what that's from, the bingo.
Yeah, so they would call out like La Senora, and it's a picture of like a woman like in a pose. And then if you had it, you would put like a coin or something on your card. And then if you got like a straight row or a diagonal, you would call it Loteria and then you would win. So
Oh, that's cool.
for me, it's like you find the card and that's like the first sign that you're next. Like that's your
Yeah.
target. Yeah, so I wanted to play with that because I was like, how weird would it be to find your image reflected on a card? And
Mm.
then we started playing with that. So now we started doing it for like I have a card based on me now, and we're doing it for like the artist and a bunch of other people. So stay tuned. You guys might be getting cards too. Of like you guys.
Ooh.
Cool.
Yeah. It's
Throw
been a
us
lot
in
of fun.
there.
Yeah. The best
I've
part, since I'm like a horror fan, I can create the merch that like I never got from like certain things. So I'm
yeah.
just like, what would I want as a horror fan? I was like, we're making mugs, we're making everything. Like, yeah.
I
We
love that so
understand.
much.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
seriously. I actually today I walked into a horror themed coffee shop completely by accident and we just did an episode on How Sue from the Japanese horror film and there was a clock. It was made like the traditional black and white clock of the cat with the eyes moving and the tail, but it was the house cat and I was like taking a picture and sending it to my other co-hosts. I'm like, "Look at this clock." Like you can't see that anywhere. That's so cool.
Yeah. And it's always like handmade stuff that you find that you're
Yeah.
like, that's amazing.
Any of the characters that you created, are they inspired by people that you know?
Yeah. So I have a book called Cinema Muerte. And
Mhm.
that one, the main characters are John, Emily, and Chris. I'm John. Emily is my wife, and Chris is my friend Chris, who a lot of people in the horror community know. He has a podcast and a really big personality, so he's everywhere.
Aw, that's so cool,
Yeah,
I love that.
and it was originally gonna be a web series that I made, well, like the three of us acting in it. But at the time that I was doing it, like I couldn't get the budget to do the monsters the way I wanted, and I didn't want to like compromise on certain things. So I sat on it, and then as soon as I started doing comics, that was the second book that I started. Like as soon as I learned how to make it, I was like, great, this one's gonna live on its own. I have to do this book. And we're on
Yeah.
issue 3 now for that one. And it's the most fun because like every scene is a reference. Like I gave my artist a script earlier this week, and it has a reference to the screenwriter Billy Wilder who did like The Apartment. And like he's in the comic now because I was just like, it's a
Nice.
book of references for like film fans, for horror fans, and that one's like the most fun. So like Chris is in that one, and every week when I send him like notes on what we're doing, he's like, just don't kill me. I was like, well, we might. Yeah.
That's amazing. I adore Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
When you decide on whether it's creatures or villains, like, to in your stories, is there any research that you do, like, for these mythical figures, or do you kinda just go off of the stories you were told as a kid? Like, what does that
A
look
lot of
like?
it is the stuff from when I was a kid, because I don't
Mhm,
want because mythology for some people, especially like the Mesoamerican gods, there are
mhm,
still parts of Mexico where those are their gods that they worship. So I don't
mhm.
want to dig too deep and make it so close to home that it feels like I'm just like kind of playing with their religion of it. But I
Sure.
wanted to do enough where it's just like this is a very fantastical version of it. Neil Gaiman
Yeah.
had like a quote about it when he did American Gods, where he's like,
Mhm,
"Don't over research because if you're over
mhm.
researching, then you're trying to like disprove something by making it your own." So that's kind of what I'm doing. I play with the mythology of it. I look into it enough to see if there's any specific factoids that I can put in mind to just make it seem a little more grounded. But I don't
Mhm.
go so far as to like try to rewrite their history thing to make it
Yeah,
fit my world. It's just like monsters exist and this is what happens when you find out about it, and it's never anything good.
I love
Right?
that.
Yeah, and then like the killers, I usually look at the the worst side of the sequels of horror movies that I liked, and I'm just like, what? Because usually by then they get kind of like ballsy and like we're gonna do something totally different. And like the new
Yeah.
Scream, they gave him a gun for a scene type thing. So I was like,
Right.
okay, what worked and what didn't work from that? And if I'm gonna, because every kind of villain has been done. So I was like,
Mhm,
what's a cool version of that that I could do that's like an homage to something that they tried that maybe now I have more pages, I can try it too and do that. So
mhm,
like for Muñeca and Mr. Big, it was kind of like that same idea of just like, all right, I have two killers because there's always one, and then in Scream, like it turns out there was two. Like I love that little
mhm.
twist in the first one. So I was like, for
Yeah.
this one, I'm just gonna start with two, and then it's just more of the mystery of like, well, how are they getting everywhere, and playing with that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite, creature or villain in horror? Like, anything, whether it's something you created or something that inspired you?
Yeah, my nickname growing up was Gizmo because I had big ol' ears. So I loved the Mogwai and like the Gremlins. Like that was like my whole life. I think I even have like a Gizmo thing behind me, but like I'm obsessed with Gremlins. So
Aw.
seeing like Spike in the first one and just like all the different silly versions of Gremlins, like that's always a huge inspiration because whenever I start to write something and it starts to feel too heavy or too serious, I'm like, you can have fun with it. Like never forget that like these things can still be dark but fun too. And I think that's when horror really thrives is like Leprechaun, where you can kind of have fun with like this is kind of silly, but also like I'm afraid. And that's
Yeah,
kind of where I always try to play in that area.
definitely, yeah, I think there's aspects of Gremlins and Leprechaun that, like, it's very creepy, but also they're cute.
Right?
They're
Yeah.
so cute.
Like I know I shouldn't want a gizmo because my son would definitely break all the rules in the first 10 minutes with it, but I'm willing to take the chance. Like
Oh, yeah, definitely.
yeah.
I would break all the rules in the first 10 minutes of it.
Yeah.
Not my son. So
We dressed my son up as Gizmo for Halloween last year, and we even had a little red push cart. So I had like the Rambo thing tied around his head, and it was a lot of fun. Like I showed him part of the movie, and he was
Yeah,
into it. But if it's not a cartoon, he loses interest. But like once the Gremlins got there and started messing things up, he was pulled right back in.
yeah. It's a
Yeah,
little slow at the beginning, but the
yeah.
antics they do, oh my god. I did wanna ask, I mean, you've kind of answered this, but, like, why do you think that telling these stories, especially, like, with Latina characters, why do you think that is so important, especially nowadays, like, in today's environment?
I think people are forgetting that things can be fun, especially for like Latinos. There's too many things outside of us that like we're battling or trying to like go against the grain on, that we forget like if we make our own version of it, then it can't be taken away. Like that's just ours. So I
Mhm.
think taking things like horror, where we've seen it and horror exists everywhere, right? Like that's like a universal language, are scary stories.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do that for us because so many like I grew up part in Mexico and part here, so I always traveled back and forth. And in
Mhm.
Mexico, the things were so genre specific. Like the only horror you got was this character named Santo, who was like a lucha libre wrestler, and he would fight monsters. But they're always like super cheesy. Like the Wolfman would wear like a deep V, and it was just a bunch of hair. Or like
Yeah.
it would be like the brides of Dracula, but they couldn't walk without like clothes falling off. So it was always just yeah, it was always just kind of like, I see what you're going for, but like there's no real horror in this. It was always just kind of cheesy. And I
Mhm.
wanted so much for like horror to exist there. And there's a
Yeah.
movie, it's really good. It's called The Tiger's Not Afraid.
I've
Um,
heard of this, yeah.
yeah, and the director of that is doing the new season of True Detective. So like
Wow.
yeah, she really like kind of jumped from like one to the other, but I love it because like you could still see her influence on both. But she's a Mexican film director, and she did with that movie what I was hoping would come from it. So when I started doing comics, I was like, well, if I ever got to meet her, like I would be proud to be like, hey, I'm doing that too.
Yeah.
So and I think like for Latinos, it's okay for us to like jump into genre, jump into stuff, and not just feel like we have to do the same kind of things that we've been doing. Like it's okay to like get weird with it. Like just
Yeah.
make it your own, and your Latin stuff will come through regardless. Like just do it.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's I think more people are starting to do that, especially in the horror community. You see more fan-made films nowadays and independent
Yeah,
films, and they're taking off. So I think it's
absolutely.
really important to, just do it.
Yeah, Shutter and stuff wasn't around when I was in college, like making movies, and I wish
Yeah.
there was something like it because we only had YouTube, but YouTube would
Yeah.
flag anything back in those days, especially. So
Yeah.
like we couldn't get away with much, or we would do what Vimeo, and then we would
Yeah.
have to send people passwords and stuff to watch our movie,
Right.
and yeah, it was a lot harder to get seen back then. But now with like Shutter, where you have like a direct market to like apply to, I'm
Yeah.
just yeah, I kinda wish I had it in me to do, like, one more movie, but my knees crack now when I stand up, so I think that's behind me a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, you still could. Come on. Don't say never,
Yeah, don't give
It's
up.
possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do still
Just
have the Cinema Morte script, so I just gotta get Chris back here for a hot minute to film something, so
hey, if you ever need any crew or actors, we know people. So
That's right.
yeah.
We are actually are people. So
we are people.
we're
You're the
people.
people.
We're the people. No.
Yeah.
I
Every
know some
once in a while.
people.
I found someone that was doing like monster makeup stuff, and I was like, "Listen, I have like very little budget, but what could we do? Like, you tell me what you're comfortable making, and I'll write around it." So I was
Mhm.
playing with that maybe even like 6 months ago. I was still like, "I think I can do this. Like, bring me out of retirement." So
Well, we will be at Days of the Dead in March, so maybe we can sit down over dinner and discuss it.
that
Absolutely.
would be great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be awesome. And then
Stay
I'll have
tuned.
gifts for you guys there too.
Aw,
That's awesome.
you're so
Yeah.
sweet.
And let me
Um,
ask this: if anybody wants to get any of your merchandise, where can they go?
So the merch is usually just at conventions. We're gonna be
Okay.
putting it on the site. The books are available online at avinacomics.com.
Okay.
And
okay.
we get a lot of hits through like the TikTok shop. Like my
Mhm.
TikTok feed now is just like me packing orders, which like thank God. But it's like, oh cool, people are actually like, it's not just me talking to people at a convention because sometimes I can tell it's like a pity buy because it'll be like a grandma walking by and she'll be like, "Oh, my grandson loves this," and I was like, "How old is he?" And then like I'll kind of pick based off of there, and then she'll like hand over money and never see me again. But like
Yeah.
now I'm starting to get engagement with like certain people, and I'm just like, okay, cool. Like hopefully this is kind of gaining some speed. But we made a bunch of pins, keychains. We made like the Loteria cards, and we're making like new ones. We made trading cards for certain ones too. So I'm
That's
finally
really
getting to
cool.
like branch out and make all the cool merch.
I love that.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And we actually met you at Days of the Dead this past November in Chicago. So
Yep.
me and Jamie met you, I believe. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
that
was a
was so
really
cool.
good show for us too. Like I didn't know what to expect because it was like my first time being there as like a seller. So I was like,
Hmm.
oh, we'll see how this goes. But my uncle was telling me, like, you gotta go, like you gotta check it out. You're gonna love it. And one of the best parts of that experience was I wrote a comic called Americana, and I base all my characters off of actors. Like, who would I cast in this? And then I show that to the artist, and I'm like, do whatever you want with this, but this is who I imagined. And Scout Taylor Compton, who was in like Rob Zombie's Halloween,
Right.
Yeah.
was the girl that I picked for that movie for Americana. And then my uncle's like, I kind of know her handler, like, let's go say hi. So I was like all shy and like nervous. I was like, I'm a guy, I wrote a comic, like, here you go. And she was like, oh, can I read it? I was like, yeah, you can keep it. And then like ran away. And then I came back a little bit later. I was like, all right, I calmed down. I'm so sorry. I was like, I'm John. I write comics. Like, you were the actress that I picked for it when we were doing the art. And then she signed one for me. So it's like here on my desk with like her signature on it. So I was just like, all
Oh,
right, now I can see the poster if we ever do a movie. Like,
she is such a badass. I loved her in Halloween and
Yeah.
everything else
yeah.
I've seen her in. Oh,
And she is so
that's
super
so
sweet
cool.
every time you meet her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a
So
big Gilmore Girls fan too. Like it's like my secret shame a little bit, but she was one of the sisters on the show. So like when I
Yeah.
finally calmed down and was able to talk to her, I was like, also, I love Gilmore Girls. And we were like joking about parts of the show. And she was like, oh, not a lot of guys. I was like, I have 5 sisters, so I've watched it.
I not by choice, but I've seen it and I fell in
I've
love with
seen
it,
it.
yeah.
I felt yeah, pretty much. I was like, I don't know who this Luke guy is that's grumpy and always drinks coffee, but he's me.
I'm not gonna lie, I managed to escape Gilmore Girls miraculously, but, there's some other more girly-esque things that I did not escape from. So,
No, my
yeah,
sisters, if they had a show, they took over the TV, and I was like, "All right, I'm in, but we're gonna watch something scary on Saturday." Like we'd rent a movie and like put. That's what I miss about like video rental places is I could just
I
walk
know.
and find something super weird and be like, "This is it." Like I don't know what this is, but we're in.
yep.
Yeah. I was actually telling, Jamie when we were, talking about Scream, I mentioned that, that was one thing that me and my dad bonded over was horror movies at the video store and just things that he used to watch when he was a kid. So, like, I missed that, and we don't have that anymore.
No, yeah, like
Yeah.
you can scroll through and like find something, but by the time you guys decide and you read the synopsis, there was something like we got to leave this video store at some point, so you didn't have all day. And now that
Right.
you
Yeah.
have all day to scroll through, you just kind of go back to your comfort movies.
Exactly, and
Yep.
the cover art was, like, the big selling point
Oh
of
yeah.
movies.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For Cinema Muerte 3, we like I have the because I get to design everything. So for the cover, that one kind of ends the first part of the arc. So I was like, it has to look like an old VHS. I was like, so like the edges are gonna look a little worn. We're gonna put the green sticker on like the corner and everything. I was like, I really want to like if this is the last one of these I get to tell for a while, I want it to go big. So that's why we put
Yeah,
like Billy Wilder and a bunch of other directors and stuff in it. But I was like, this is it. Like I want this one to be when they see it, they're gonna be like, okay,
that's really cool.
Very cool.
Now I wanted to ask you, do you work with the same artists and colorists and letters every issue, or do you mix it up depending on the story? Like, does it just depend or
yeah, so like each series has its kind of team that I work with, but we
Mhm,
do have an anthology that we're releasing. It's called like Mile High Fright, and it's going to be like a little bit more adult oriented horror stories. So the first
mhm.
one is like a twist in Indiana Jones. Like if Indiana Jones was just like the worst guy you've ever met, and it takes place on a plane, there's like a vampire and a stewardess. Like it's hilariously weird and then we're doing issue 2 with another artist, and that one is like a 1940s black and white film where there's a casting director that's not finding the right actors, so she's building them from corpses. So it's like a
That's
Bride of
That's
Frankenstein.
amazing.
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So that one, like, so many of my comics have movie references in it that I'm just like, oh, I think I'm gonna fall into like a real niche market with this
Oh
stuff.
my
But like
god.
when I want it, because I've always wanted to do a Frankenstein story, is like if I'm gonna do it, I got to do it like full on me. So like casting directors, and like even then like it pulls back a curtain and there's a bunch of producers like giving their
Mhm.
opinion to her as she's stitching up the person. And since it's horror, like she's not totally numbed out. Like she's just numb, but she could still feel the stitching and you get the monologue happening. So that one's gonna
Wow.
be fun, but it's all under that banner of it's like Mile High Fright, and each issue is gonna be its own team and its own story. So there's no interconnecting anything. It's just you could pick up any issue and it's just meant to like scare you and just in and out.
See, I love that because I mean, I've been a fan of a few comics here and there, just it's hit or miss for me, but there's something that's really cool about just being able to pick up any issue, not worry about whether or not you've read the previous ones and be able to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, there's especially like some books have such a long run that I have to buy
Yeah.
like the trades for it and then I can go into the issues. And by then I'm
Mhm.
kind of like worn down on it. So
Yeah.
I want my books to be able to be like picked up. And if you just want like a one and done, here are the one shots. If you want like a full arc, here's this one. And then we just kind of go from there.
That's really cool. And I'm obsessed with the Frankenstein story. I think it's really cool, all the iterations. So that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I entered this HBO writing competition when I was in college. Like they do like the screen pipeline type thing.
Yeah.
And I wrote it and I was so proud of it. And it was before the I Frankenstein movie came out. So,
Mhm.
like, I sat there and I hit submit on my script, and I had a joke in there where it was the Professor Frankenstein sitting there, and someone's like, "Oh, it's Professor, like, Frankenstein," and he's like, "It's Frankenstein," like, kinda playing off the, Young Frankenstein joke, and
Yeah.
then I kid you not, like, 2 days later, the trailer for I, Frankenstein drops, and I'm like, "Oh, they're doing another one," and then they have that joke in the trailer, so I
They
lost the
stole
competition.
it.
It was like I lost the thing because they gave me notes back because like I paid for that tier or whatever. They're like, well, this joke that you were like kind of banking on was already used. So like I was
That
like, all right, well, the
sucks.
script, yeah, wasn't strong enough, I guess. But I remember like since then, I was like, one day I'll do my Frankenstein and it'll be perfect. And then Guillermo del Toro was like, I'm doing Frankenstein. I was like, well, beat me again. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it ever gets old. We'll be doing, go ahead and announce it. We're gonna be doing, the Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, pretty soon, and that's got Frankenstein elements in it, and we're really excited about that one. So and that came out in 2021, I think. So, I mean, I don't think that
Yeah.
story ever gets old for people. So
No.
and this is a new version of it.
Yeah, I'm hoping not because I was like, as soon as my comic comes out, like I can talk about it and like do more. But it's just every time I get pages back for it, I was like, yes, like finally I'm here.
You'll have to let us know when that release date's coming out, because I will definitely be reading that. That sounds
Yeah.
Absolutely.
amazing. Lotheria, that's the one that, the comic that you sent us that we, looked over. That's one of your latest releases that just came out in January, right?
Yeah. So since Days of the Dead, we've had like 4 new books come out.
Okay.
So yeah, we've been like busy, but Loteria has like it feels so much like a traditional slasher, which is what I
Mhm.
wanted. That I was like excited to like give it to people, especially like horror fans. Cause like if you like horror, it's not like a big boogie monster story. It's there's like killers and you're at home and what's happening next. And
Yeah.
I love like 90s horror movies like Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, all those like that's what I
Mhm.
grew up on. That's what I was going to like see after school and stuff. And I miss that. I miss that kind of like cheesy, campy fun. So for
Yeah.
this one, I was just like grabbing all the elements that I could from it. And especially I know how you did well, like What You Did Last Summer was one of those
Yeah.
movies that like I loved Jennifer Love Hewitt. So like
Oh
for
yes.
yeah. Uh because I used to watch Party of Five, and when she left that show, I was like, "Well, I'm done with this show too." But
I
I
remember
wanted,
suffering through Ghost Whisperer just because she was in it.
yeah, that show went on a little too long. Like I remember
Yeah.
jumping in and being like, "Okay, so it's gonna be a Creature of the Week story. Yeah, I'm fine with it if it's her. Like it's fine." And then after
Yeah.
a while, I was like, "I'm done."
Yeah.
Yeah, I went through the same thing with Supernatural too, where it was just like, I love these guys. I like their banter. I am 14 seasons deep, and I'm gonna keep watching, but I need to know that there's an end. Like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that show went on for a little too long too. I stopped, like, for about a year, and my friend was like, "You gotta finish it, it's so good," and I finally finished it the year that the final season came out, and I was like, "Alright, we're finishing it," and I just held
Yeah.
my breath for, like, several seasons, I'm like,
Yeah.
"And now I'm gonna cry."
Yeah.
The ending was perfect, but it took a little
It
too long to
was.
get there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So for Low
I
I just grabbed like all those like 90s references, all like that love of
yeah.
like that kind of cheesy horror. And then I was like, this is where I start.
Yeah, I definitely got the references for sure, especially Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about those villains though, the character designs and everything. How did you come up with that? Was there anything that inspired you?
Yeah, so like that traditional Mexican dress, there used to
Mhm.
be a porcelain doll that my grandmother had, and it had that on there, and it freaked me out. Cause like
Yeah.
it was so pale that it kind of like any light would reflect off of it. And
Mm.
in Mexico where we slept, there were just 3 beds in the living room, and then my
Yeah.
grandparents had like their own room. But like if a light came through, because it was right by the highway too. So if a light shined through, it would just be like darkness, darkness, shadow, shadow, doll, shadow,
Oh
shadow,
god.
darkness. And it like there was always cars. So it was kind of like being stuck in like those old like film reel things that would spin around. You would see like the jockey. It was like that, but just like this one doll always looking at me. But I felt like if I lost track of it, it would move.
Ooh,
So
yeah.
I was just when I got to designing, I was just like, well, what scares me? And I was like, that like that's all that thing. And then I wanted to make her fun. That's why she has the more dialogue of the two killers, because I
Mhm.
kind of wanted, since she's a doll, I thought like Harley Quinn, kind of colorful, bright. So she has all like the sassy comebacks, all like the one-liners. Because it'd be for me as a reader, it's more fun for her to say something and then like slit the throat. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I
Right.
wanted. And then for Mr. Big, I wanted like clean everything where it looks like he's just calling the murder out and she's the one doing it. You don't expect that from him because he's like in a press suit. And then
Yeah.
even like the first reveal of him like kind of sliding out, you're just like, he's not dirty, he's not anything. Like he just kind of like came out of the woodwork. And that's
Yeah.
something I wanted to show too is like, I want you to see how they're getting in because that's what's going to make you the most uncomfortable later on. Like after you're done reading it, you're like, well, they got away. And then you're like, he was under the bed. So like, I'm going to look real quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I can have
They were
people
both
like peek over their shoulder one time. Yeah.
yeah. They were both really creepy, but him especially, like, he kinda reminded me of, the character from Black Phone a little bit with the mask, like, just
Yes.
very, "Oh, like, you don't wanna mess with this guy." Like, she's gonna talk your ear off before she kills you, but he's not gonna say a word before he slits your throat, like, ugh.
Yeah. And
Loved
that's
it.
what I wanted to. I want them to kind of be opposites because they kind of like if you saw them in a room, you would think, oh, they're a couple because they would show up together. So I wanted the
Mhm.
dynamic to be different personalities.
Mhm.
And I like we're halfway through issue 2 right now as far as like the art and everything's going. And I get to like every issue is gonna ramp itself up as far as
Mm.
like the characters because there's that scene where you're at the cemetery and then you see the girl and her boyfriend in the foreground or in the background and then like all these other characters right here. So that's the
Yeah.
friend group that we're going to have to meet and the killers will start to come after. So
Yes, there's definitely some
yeah.
trauma between that friend group, so I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yes.
Yeah. So for that too, like the scene in the cemetery where like there's like the grandma yelling at the girl. I
Mhm.
watched that Encanto movie. And I remember being
Yeah.
like, "Oh, this is like a really pretty Latin story." I was like, "But the one thing they got wrong is like Latin grandmothers don't forgive." Like my grandma has a blood feud with the lady that lives across her street in Mexico because of something that happened in like 1960. And like they have grandkids. They like their lives have moved way beyond that, but when they see each other, it's just eyes locked in. So I was like, if I'm gonna put a grandmother in this story, I was like, it's got to be real and it's got to be like this unforgiving force.
That is so fun, I love that.
Yeah.
Now, with your future, installments of this story, do you think that we'll learn more about these characters, or can you tell us yet? Like the villains?
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit. So
Okay.
finding out like the why is going to be the most important thing, because once you find out why they're doing it, who they are will just really start to make sense. But I think the
Mhm.
most fun's going to be how they get there. It's
Yeah.
You're going to see, because it all ties together to like that Moni girl who's like Tombstone, you see her crying in front of, because we don't
Mhm.
see her death. We just know this book starts and that girl's already dead. So
Right.
in issue 2, we find out who she is right off the bat. She was part of the friend group. Something happened. She's died. Certain people haven't forgiven them yet. The grandmother, like we see, and the brother, and just what happens when you can't let go of hate. Because
Mm.
I'm a real superstitious person. Like if there was a way for me to zoom into like that shrine thing going on behind me, there's
Yeah.
like sage, salt, like every Mexican healing thing. It's happening back here somewhere, and
Yeah.
like that's something I got from like my dad was like the superstitious one in the family. So we would go, like if somebody was sick, we would go to a doctor, but on the way back, my dad's like, we're gonna stop. And we go to like this strip mall where there's like an old lady, but she had just like walls of every type of Jesus thing and candle, and then just like witch bags that she would like brew. And she's like, you gotta use this. And it would be like bay leaves that you would write like feel better and tie it to a black candle and light it and let it burn down, and that was like you putting your intentions into the air to make you feel better. Or you would put
Yeah.
garlic at the heel of your sock and sleep with it, and it would suck out whatever was making you sick.
Yeah.
So I grew up with like these witch doctor people in my life to the point where like it was normal, and then my son got sick and I'm like doing it, and my wife's like, what are you doing? She's like, what's going on with my 1-year-old? Why are you rubbing an egg all over his head and then cracking it? And I was like, well, I got to see like who's doing him bad if he's getting sick. She's like, that's not how a cold works. And I was like, oh, I was like, that makes sense. Yeah, no, this is on me.
Oh, you've gotta incorporate that at some point.
It's all that is gonna be in Loteria. Like that's why
Oh,
I picked
great.
that book, because it's like all the weird Latin stuff that I want to like showcase, but also kind of make fun of. I get to do in that one with like love. So like I said,
Yeah.
Loteria was a fun game, but even when I was little and playing it, we would play with like beans as the counters, and I
Yeah.
would be like, guys, what are we doing here? Like this is fine because we're all family, but like
Yeah.
someone comes through the door, what are we doing here? And then my dad's like, that's just how we always played, so we got to play it that way. I'm like, all right, like we're in. If we're doing it, we're doing it the whole way. So
Yeah. I love
yeah,
that. With the comics and everything, obviously this isn't your full-time job, but, what would you say to other, storytellers or artists out there, that maybe wanna get into something like what you're doing?
just start doing it. Like a lot of people say, like, well, I need to find this, I need to do that. No, you don't. You can do it.
Yeah.
I can't draw to save my life, but if there was a story that I needed to get out, I would draw it. It would be stick
Mhm.
figures. It looked terrible, but it would be my way to conveying the story that I had to get out of me. And if you don't have that off like the get go, then don't jump into this, because like just because I love one of my stories doesn't mean the audience is. And
Mhm.
like the hardest part is every convention I go to, it's like me standing at a table with like my art splayed out, and people come up and they'll look at it and they'll be like, not for me, and just walk away. And you got to let it roll off your shoulder. Like you can't take it personally. Like not every story is for everybody. Like that's why I talk to people at these conventions to be like, what are you into? You like westerns? I have a western. You like
Mhm.
fantasy stuff? We were working on like a D&D style story. So I was like, oh, I have this one coming up, but I also have this one that I finished. And then like really matching the book to the person. But if they're not interested, let them go. Like don't
Yeah.
write a book to appease others. Write the
Mhm.
book that you're not seeing that you want for yourself, and the fans will find you. Like people will come to these books if it's honest and if you're passionate about it. If you're just That's why I stay away from like superhero stuff, because it's so saturated and everyone's got their opinion on what heroes should be, that I'm just
Yeah.
like, that's not my story to tell. If that's yours, great. But like n- be honest about it. Don't just make him like evil Superman's been done to dead, like to death.
Yeah.
Find your hero story that you need to tell and do it. But
Mhm.
like be honest about why you're telling it. Because if it is
Mhm.
just for a paycheck, one, there's no money in comics, but you'll see it. Like people will be able to pick it up and be like, this is there's no honesty in here. There's no truth. There's just like a guy
Mhm.
punching another guy because the world's gonna end every week. Like, who wants
Yeah.
to live in Metropolis
Right.
then? Yeah, it's like a lot of these cities, like Gotham. I don't know. Like I get people are like, "Well, we're poor, we can't leave Gotham." Man, go anywhere else. Like
It's
if
gotta
it's
be
like
cheaper somewhere
it's got to be
else.
cheaper somewhere else. Yeah, like just move to Smallville because like nothing bad happens in Smallville since this one guy moved to Metropolis. Real convenient that Clark took all the problems with him to the city. Like, just go there. There's got to
Yeah,
be, yeah. Because I used to be like a big Marvel DC guy, and every time I would read it, I'm just like, man, like every bad guy wants to rule the world, but I don't think they're thinking about what Tuesday looks like. Like if I'm like the emperor of the world, and they're just like, oh, you have to build me a ray gun so that way we could take out this other planet. I'm just like, well, that's gonna be like forever. It's gonna take forever to build it. There's always gonna be a resistance. You're always squashing something. I don't want to rule people. Like that's not fun. That's not nobody would actually want to do that. So
right.
like that's why so
It's the
many of these villains,
conquest.
yeah, or like one guy comes in and he's like, I have to be like the toughest person on this planet. And I was like, why isn't your planet good enough, man? Like, fix you. Get therapy,
Yeah.
Darkseid. Like, fix that. Yeah.
Thanos just needed therapy.
That's all he needed was one person to say, you're enough. Like, and then he wouldn't have done it. Like, he could have just like snapped and become a celebrity. He would have been happier.
Definitely. Is there something that you would like to do, whether it's in an upcoming story or a new story that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
Yeah, I have this short story I did called The Forever Friend, and
Mhm.
it's The Cat in the Hat meets Pennywise. So it's a group of friends, and it's summer of 1999. So like Y2K is on everyone's mind, and this they're going from eighth grade to high school. So everything just feels so final to this one boy in the group that he like makes a wish at like their last summer like camp out on like a shooting star. They're like, hey, I just want us to be friends forever. Like I don't want to lose this. So a very innocent wish turns evil, and then there's like this pantomime clown thing that starts to make sure that they're never separated, and that's where the horror comes in. So then it's like they sneak out of the camp to go to like a party. It's like the first big boy girl party. So it plays with all the tropes of like young nerdy kids, the more confident kid, the athlete, all that stuff that makes up like a core friend group from like a Stephen King, like Stand By Me type thing. It's all there.
Mhm.
And I've been trying to get that book off the ground for like years. And I think I finally got it to a place because I wanted it to be a novel. Like that's
Mhm.
just the way I've always seen it. I have art done for it for like covers already because like I
Mhm.
need it to go. But that was one that was like a screenplay that I wrote that turned into a novel that I was like, I'm gonna make it a comic because I can do that. But now it's found its way back to the book. But
Mhm.
now part of me wants to shoot it as a trailer. It's just yeah.
Do it.
So
Take your own
but that's
advice,
Okay.
do it.
yeah. But that's the story that like that's the one that haunts me. Like it keeps me like I'll wake up my wife and I'm like, I figured this part of it out. And she's like, you've said it like 8 times. Like go write it. I'm like, oh, I can't. It's like 1 a.m. I gotta go to bed. But yeah, like that creature too, because like he has a top hat. So it's not gonna give anything away, but there's like bullies, right? Because like all Stephen King stories have bullies in it.
Sure.
So there's these bullies, and when he finds them, he like you don't see what he does to them initially, right? Because I love the Jaws kind of cutaway before the people get eaten type thing. So you see the kids talking to the thing, trying to calm it down, and the creature, the forever friend's like, I've already done so much work for you, and he takes off his hat, and you see the kids kind of like a Twizzler pull and peel, like wrapped up around each other inside of the hat, but they're happy, like there's these big grins on their face, and they're
Uh,
like, oh, we're finally can be together forever because we're stuck together. And then he puts the hat back on, but he talks in nursery rhyme, like he talks in rhymes, like Cat in the
yeah.
Hat. So it was a lot of fun to write it, but like that creature is the one like if I write it too much, I have to like take a walk and do something because I'm like, oh, he's dancing around a little too much. Like I got to get him out of here before I'm freaked out.
Yeah, for sure. That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
Ethan, did you have any other questions?
I think he about answered everything. I'm just excited about all the stuff that you're doing and can't wait to read it.
I know.
Thank you.
Where can our listeners find you and your work?
So the best place is avinacomics.com. We
Okay.
do have a Patreon. It's like patreon.com/Aviña Comics. So if they are looking to make comics or like practice storytelling techniques and stuff, I teach like on there every so often.
Okay.
But it's a good way to like get direct hold of me if you have any questions on stuff, or if you want to like, if you have a story you want to tell, you just need pointers or you need help finding an artist, let me know. I'm totally available on there.
Awesome. And we'll have those links in the description as well. And upcoming convention appearances, just remind us again.
Yeah, Northwest Indiana Comic Con. That's
Okay.
in like a week or so.
Okay.
C2E2, Days of the Dead, and Fan Expo in August.
Awesome. We're so excited.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you, John, so much for coming on and sharing what you do with us. It's been really interesting. And like I
Absolutely.
said, yeah, like I said before, this is a big reason why we started this podcast is to talk to horror creators and get the word out there on your art because I don't think that horror creators are appreciated enough. So
Thank you guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Nina,
I'm Ethan.
and this
We
is
are the
Bloody
Bloody
Essentials.
Essentials.
Thanks for listening.